Welcome to chess. This board game of skill and strategy is played by millions of people every day. Although chess can be complex, you don't have to worry right now because in this video, you'll learn how to play chess and the important basics of the game. Let's go. A chess set has a board 8 squares by 8 squares and 32 total pieces. Chess is a two-player game with the players at opposite sides. A chessboard has black and white squares alternated, but wait, my board is brown and black. In chess, the lighter color is called white and the darker color is called black. So in my board, the brown squares are white. In this board, the green squares are black. When setting up the board, make sure the corner square on your right is white. That is important. Also, we label the 8 rows and 8 columns of the chessboard for coordinates, and you will see why later. The rows are called ranks and are labeled 1 to 8. The columns are called files, labeled A to H. Coordinates are written with the file number first in lowercase, then the rank number. For example, A1, B2, C3, H8. You get it. Once the chessboard is set up the pieces. There are 2 teams, one for each player. One is white, the other is black. In the chess game, white always goes first. The 16 pieces of your team is set up in the 2 ranks closest to you. Now, what are the pieces and where do they go? Let's see. First, 2 rooks that look like castles are placed in the corners. Then, 2 knights that look like horses start next to the rooks. Next, 2 bishops with their distinct cuts go next to the knights. The queen with that crown goes in the same square color as its own color next to a bishop. Queens are color conscious. The king, the tallest piece with the cross on top, goes next to the queen. Finally, 8 tiny pawns assemble in the rank in front of the rest of the team. Now let's learn everything about these pieces. The pawn's the weakest piece in chess, yet it's so special. On a pawn's first move, it can move 1 or 2 squares forward at a time. After that, pawns move only 1 square forward and only forward. Isn't that straightforward? Pawns are the only piece that captures differently than it moves, as they capture 1 square diagonally forward to the left or right. That means a pawn can't move if a piece is directly in front of it until it's gone or there's a piece for the pawn to capture. If a pawn goes 6 squares forward to the other side of the board, it can turn into a rook, bishop, knight, or queen. This is called promotion, and that's one of the 2 extraordinary features of pawns. The second one is en passant, French for in passing. En passant is when a pawn moves 2 squares forward next to an enemy pawn, and that enemy pawn can actually capture that pawn, acting like the pawn moved 1 square. To do en passant, you have to do it immediately after the pawn moves, or you won't be able to do it afterwards. The knight moves in a way best described as an L shape. It moves 2 squares straight in any direction, then 1 square to the left or right of that. Knights capture like how they move, and knights are the only pieces that can jump over pieces in its path. The bishop moves diagonally in all 4 directions, any amount of squares. Bishops capture like how they move and can't jump. Notice how one bishop is always stuck on the white squares, or light squares, and the other on black squares, or dark squares. This earns the names light squared bishop and dark squared bishop. The rook moves any amount of squares horizontally or vertically straight, or along the ranks and files in other words. Rooks capture like how they move and can't jump, except in a special move called castling, which you'll learn about in a minute. The queen moves any amount of squares straight and diagonally, so she moves like a rook and bishop combined. She's very powerful. The queen captures like how it moves and can't jump. The king is the most important piece in chess as the game revolves around him. He's the piece the other team targets so they win. How the king moves is simple. He moves 1 square in any direction, letting him go to 8 squares at most. The king captures like how it moves. The following 3 things about the king are very important in chess, with checkmate being the aim of the game. Check is when the king is under attack by an enemy piece. In chess, kings never get captured, so when a king is in check, it has to get out of check. Of course, kings can never enter check. The king can get out of check in 3 ways. 1. Capture the piece checking him. 2. Block the check with a piece of his. Or 3. Move the king to a safe square. Checkmate, mate for short, is when the king is in check and cannot escape. Whatever the king does, it can't avoid check, is trapped, and the checkmated king's team loses the game and the game ends. Castling is a special move involving the king and rook. You can castle into king's side where the king and rook are separated by 2 squares, or queen's side where the king and rook are separated by 3 squares. You can only castle when the squares in between are empty and if the king and rook haven't moved at all yet. Castling works like this. You move the king 2 squares toward the rook, and the rook jumps over the king, landing right next to it. Castling brings the rook out from the corner and the king into safety. You cannot castle through a square putting the king in check. You cannot castle into check, obviously. And you can't castle out of check too. I guess it's because that would be overpowered, but I don't know. A chess game doesn't always have to end in a win or loss. It can end in a draw too, in multiple ways. A draw by insufficient material is where there aren't enough strong pieces for checkmate to be possible. It's impossible to checkmate a lone king with only your own king, only a king and bishop, and only a king and knight. You can also draw by stalemate. Stalemate is when, on a player's turn, they have no legal moves to make, and the king isn't in check. This is not the same as checkmate. Here are 2 examples so you can understand stalemate better. First one. Here only the black king is left. It's black's turn, but it can only go in check, which is illegal. Black isn't in check now, so it's stalemate. Second, white's king can't move here, it isn't in check. White's pawn is blocked, so it can't move either. And the white bishop can't move either, or else the king would be in check. Draw by repetition is when a position is repeated 3 times. If checks are involved and the targeted king can't escape the series of checks, this is called perpetual check, and it's a draw. The draw by 50 move rule doesn't happen so often. It's when, for 50 moves straight, no pawns have moved and no captures have been made. Algebraic chess notation. No, algebraic chess notation does not contain any algebra. That's why we can also just call it chess notation, simply. It's not too hard to learn, and this is very useful. Now we're going to be using coordinates. When recording moves, we use a capital letter to represent whatever piece is moving. The king is K, the queen is Q, the rook is R, the bishop is B, and the knight is N, not K. And there are so many pawns that we don't need a letter for it. Now let's say this rook moves to A7. We record this move as RA7, rook A7. If a pawn moves to, say, D4, the move is simply D4. If a piece makes a capture, we put an X before the squared, like queen takes F7. For a pawn, we record a file they came from, like E takes D5. If a piece gives a check, we put a plus sign at the end of the move, like bishop E5 check. Checkmate's recorded by a hashtag at the end, like knight F2 mate. Castling king side is recorded as OO, queen side as OOO. For pawn promotion, after the square, we put an equal sign, then the piece the pawn promoted to. For example, A8 equals queen, H1 equals knight, B takes C8 equals queen check. Sometimes ambiguous moves can happen, which is when 2 of the same type of piece can move to the same square, so we need more distinction. So we put the file letter, or rank number if both pieces are on the same file, right after the piece letter. For example, rook AD1, knight GF6, rook 1 E7. When recording a game, we write the move number, white's move, and black's move. Both white's and black's move counts as a singular move in games, not 2. Here's an example of a chess game that ended in 7 moves. Disclaimer, this is a made-up game. Here we go. 1. E4, D5. 2. E takes D5, queen takes D5. 3. Knight C3, queen E5 check. 4. Knight GE2, E6. 5. B3, bishop C5. 6. Bishop B2, queen F5. 7. Knight G3, queen takes F2 mate. And the game's over. It's important to know how valuable chess pieces are, so you have a better idea of what to do with them. We use a point system to mark the value of pieces, and this is called points of material. A pawn is worth 1 point. It's 1 point of material, at least until it promotes. A knight is worth 3 points, and the bishop is also worth 3 points. A rook is worth 5 points, a queen is worth 9 points, and the king is priceless. Of course, you have to be extra careful with your more powerful pieces, the rook and queen, than the others, the pawn, knight, and bishop. You can trade pieces off to reduce the amount of pieces on the board and exchange equal amounts of material. It's simple math. Oh, and a trade in chess is when you capture an opponent's piece only to have a piece of yours captured back. A fair trade or equal exchange can be a pawn for a pawn, a knight for a bishop, or a bishop and knight for a rook and pawn, because 3 points plus 3 points equals 5 points plus 1 point, both equal 6. But keep in mind that this is just a rough guideline. Sometimes you shouldn't make certain trades based on the position of your chess game. You'll understand that better once you start getting into chess. Tactics are very important in chess. And the 5 most common ones are forks, pins, skewers, discovered attacks, and double checks. The fork is when a piece attacks 2 or more pieces at once. Forks are most common with knights, and forks guarantee winning a piece. The pin is when a piece attacks a piece, and the attacked piece cannot move, or a more valuable piece will be captured. If the king is involved, the pinned piece can't move at all, because it would be illegal to. The skewer is when a piece attacks a piece, and when it moves away, another piece is revealed for the attacker to capture, which is less valuable than the piece that was attacked first. This usually happens with kings. The discovered attack is when a piece moves and reveals an attack by another piece, or it can reveal a check, so it would be a discovered check. This is really deadly if the piece that moves also attacks a piece. The double check is a discovered check when the piece that moves also checks the king. So 2 pieces check the king at the same time. This forces the king to move as it can't block or capture one of the pieces. And this sometimes can lead a mate. It's important to know how to checkmate, and there are many different patterns in chess that are used to checkmate. For now, it's best to know the 2 most basic checkmating patterns, ladder mate and king and queen mate. Ladder mate involves 2 rooks, or sometimes 2 queens, or 1 queen and 1 rook. The idea is to trap the king and force it to retreat back all the way to the edge, covering the files or ranks. Check the king, making sure it can't get further away from the edge, and continue until it's at the edge and can't retreat to another file or rank. Also, don't let the king take one of your rooks or queens, move it to safety instead, like this. The king and queen mate is done like this. The queen slowly restricts the king's movement by acting like a checking knight. The queen follows the king until it's at the edge in a sort of jail cell. Then get the king to help the queen to deliver checkmate, like this. Oh, and one final note. Always watch out for stalemates and make sure the king can move until mate. This is very important when conducting a checkmate attack. And that's it! You've learned how to play chess and the important basics. This was a lot of info, so you may need to watch this video again. If you want to learn more about chess, there's plenty of resources out there. Bye, have a good time playing chess.